Merida just launched their Bosch Powered e-bikes. Well, it's not like they haven't had Bosch Powered e-bikes before, but they haven't had full suspension EMTBs running the Bosch motor. So now we get the Merida eOne-Sixty SL, like the super light. But as most mid-power, mild EMTBs running the Bosch motor, it's hardly super light. The top of the line eOne-Sixty SL 10K is like 19.5 kilos, according to Merida. So I guess with pedals, you can easily tip 20 kilos. Then there's the eOne-Eighty. Yeah, a proper long travel EMTB running the Bosch Performance CX 85 Nm, the new Gen 5 motor. And allegedly, there are also some commuter bikes, city bikes, but I looked for them, but I couldn't see them. Anyway, we're here to focus on the full suspension bikes. And these bikes, in some ways, remind me, or rather look like, the 2024 eOne-Sixty. I mean, one is called the eOne-Sixty, one is called the eOne-Sixty SL, but they're actually quite different, mainly because the old 2024 eOne-Sixty isn't actually a 160mm travel bike. The eOne-Sixty SL, it is 160mm travel, both front and rear. And quite uncharacteristically, it's got a 29er rear wheel. Merida used to have mullet bikes only, but the Bosch system brings a few changes to the eOne-Sixty SL. The older Shimano powered Merida full suspension EMTBs, the 2024 lineup, it had the rear shock twisted 90 degrees with the piggyback pointing sideways. This was done to allow room for the 360 watt range extender. But the Bosch range extender, it's a smaller one, the PowerMore 250. So there is room in the frame to position the shock the proper way, with the piggyback pointing down. And that means you don't have to sideways offset the shock either. So I think the rocker, the bottom attachment of the shock, looks so much cleaner. Very nice on this new Merida eOne-Sixty. The rocker is hidden behind sort of this brace on the C-tube, and this is basically the new look of the Merida Bosch powered EMTBs. Both the new EMTB models, they come with what Merida calls the agilometer sizing. Frame sizes are still called XS, S, M, L, XL, but now S means short rather than small, and L means long. The idea is you pick the frame size depending on the frame and bike length, sort of what Specialized have been doing for a couple of years. So frame sizes are no longer measured in C-tube height. Okay, the eOne-Sixty SL. It does of course come with the Bosch SX motor, 55 Nm. It can only be had with the 400 Wh battery, the compact tube 400, which is fixed inside the frame. And that's how Merida has always done it. If you want a light, nimble bike, you can't have a big battery, and the battery is fixed inside the down tube. The eOne-Sixty SL is only available with a carbon frame, and it comes in 3 models: the 10K, the 8000, and the 6000. On my first ride on this bike, I rode the 10K, and it's a nice bike with a new FSA SCI 3 30mm internal width carbon ribs. And they are 1495 grams claimed by FSA. So that's a proper light, rugged all-mountain wheel set. And it comes with the new SRAM Maven Ultimate brakes. That's the first time I've tested this. And I really like these new SRAM brakes with a mineral oil system and a shorter lever with a nice feel to the brake. Without doubt, the best SRAM brake I've ever ridden. Looking closer at the frame of the eOne-Sixty SL, unsurprisingly, it's got the flex stays. So just like the 2024 eOne-Sixty, it's missing the pivot point either at the bottom of the seat stay or at the end of the chain stays. So the rear triangle will flex as the suspension goes through its travel. Merida is running this on their carbon frame bikes, even on the eOne-Sixty non-assist bike. So I think this is the way forward for Merida. Then there's the SRAM XX Axis drivetrain, nice burly Maxxis Minion or Assegai tires. Yeah, nicely spec'd bike. But the most of the riding was done on the entry level eOne-Sixty SL6000. So we went on a longer group ride, going up some pretty steep, washed out farm roads, going uphill, just keeping a relatively high cadence, and the climb was a breeze, really. It does, of course, help that everyone else on the group ride was riding the SL motor, but we were doing like 15 kilometers per hour on the climbs, and no problem. Even the steepest bits, it went perfectly fine. It was just so easy going up the steep hills with the 450 chainstays, not having to focus on body position to keep the front wheel down. And yeah, 450mm chainstays, that's quite long on the Merida. They used to have 439.5 for years, and then they increased it to 446 on the 2024 eOne-Sixty, and now 450 on this lightweight bike. Is that a bit surprising? Check out my interview with the Merida head of mountain bike to hear his explanation of the design choices. Another quite surprising number is the 64 degrees head angle. That's the slackest found on any Merida EMTB. It's half a degree slacker than on the 170mm travel eOne-Sixty full power bike. The reasoning for making this bike longer, slacker, with a bigger rear wheel is this lighter bike can have a longer wheelbase, a longer rear end, slacker front without making it too sluggish on the trails. So the eOne-Sixty SL, it has sort of enduro ambitions. You can go quite fast downhill. And with the lower weight, this slacker, longer geometry works quite well on easier trails too. It's relatively easy bringing this bike through sharp turns, going off ledges, lifting, leaning backwards, lifting the front end doesn't take much work. So it's compromises. This is the way Merida has prioritized. You get the bigger rear wheel, a bit more wheelbase to add some stability to this otherwise light handling, relatively fast steering, quick and nimble EMTB. So back to our group ride. We hit the trails. The first one, they were quite mellow trails, slightly downhill, lots of small trail obstacles to bounce off, lots of sharp turns, and the surface was quite hard, loose over hard, sandy conditions. It was quite nice having the longer rear end with a more forward central seating position. You could just sit on the bike going through this relatively loose corners, and you would have a nice weight distribution between the rear and front wheel. And then I found the proper rocky, lots of boulders, loose conditions, and many ledges and steep drops, and even a few jumps. Having this lighter, nimble bike on those burly sections, it worked out perfectly fine. I usually like it when I get an EMTB that hasn't got a 12-speed drivetrain. This 6000 SL, it's got the Shimano Deore brakes and the Shimano Deore 12-speed drivetrain. And on a milder, light EMTB, it actually makes sense having 12-speed drivetrain. When you're going uphill at quite some speed, trying to maintain the proper cadence, it's nice to be able to shift, just altering the gear ratio slightly. So we're doing a bit of shifting when riding this bike, much more than on a full power EMTB. So to sum it up, this Merida eOne-Sixty SL, it handled everything we did on this trail. Steep, rocky sections, steep climbs, loose corners. It was a fun, nimble bike with a precise steering. It has some enduro ambitions, meaning it's really quite capable on the descents. And it can climb anything as long as you're prepared to keep the cadence up. And it has the geometry suited for some really steep climbing. Then there's the eOne-Eighty. Yeah, I was surprised about some of the design choices on the eOne-Sixty SL, but that's nothing compared to the eOne-Eighty. Yeah, this bike, it comes in 4 spec levels, the 400, 500, 700 and 900. All alloy frame bikes, all with detachable batteries, and all with 800 watt-hours battery, except for the entry level 400, which has a 600 watt-hours battery. So the weight of all 3 models with the 800 battery is claimed at about 27 kilos. So yeah, quite a lot. Merida decided when they're making an alloy frame, detachable battery, heavy bike, why not make it a category 5 bike for bike park downhill riding? So if you've seen like videos on YouTube of people snapping their rear triangle, snapping their frame, you might be less worried if you get a category 5 bike. It's got 435mm chainstays. That's surprisingly short. I was sort of expecting Merida to have abandoned the shorter rear ends because they went from the 440 to 446 on the full power eOne-Sixty. And for some reason, the head angle is 64.5 degrees. So it's steeper than on the SL bike, which is a tad surprising. But Merida has their reasoning for it. So check out that aforementioned video where I talked to the Merida head of mountain bike and discuss this quite in depth. I'll get back to it later when talking about the riding characteristics of this bike. The bike I rode, the eOne-Eighty 500, it's the cheapest of the models with the big 800 watt-hours battery. And it's not a super expensive bike. And it comes with nice suspension, the RockShox Seb Select up front, and a nice Vivid base model for the rear suspension. If you study the rear end, yeah, it hasn't got the flex stays with a alloy frame. And according to Merida, because of the long stroke length of the shock and the long travel of the back, it would be too much flex on the rear triangle. So they abandoned the flex stays on this bike. On this bike too, there is room for the range extender, so you can keep the shock in line with the piggyback pointing down. And it gets the same lower attachment of the shock. So like I said, this is the new design language of the Merida Bosch Powered EMTBs. We get a 10-speed drivetrain on the 500 model, and I quite like it. It's a Q's 1148 teeth. It's got all the gear ratios I would need. And it's nice having the fatter, more solid chain, which hopefully will last a bit longer than the 12-speed chains. The brakes, I've ridden them before. It's the Tektro Gemini 535. It's a fine brake, really. The lever, it's not that long, but it's got a quite long lever throw. But braking performance is actually fine. Well-spec'd, burly components on this bike. So, riding the bike. Will it climb? I mean, for 35 chainstays with 180mm fork, and this is a mullet bike, so you got a 29er up front, making the front end, the handlebar position, quite tall. Those things aren't ideal for climbing. Sure, the C-tube angle is 78.5 degrees, which does help a bit for climbing. So we got on the bike and rode those steep, washed out farm roads, and no issues. At the steepest sections, I leaned forward a bit to keep the front wheel down, but it was mostly carefree riding this bike up. It's sort of how Merida envisions this bike being used. It's made for the descents, for bike park downhill riding. And in their experience, riding like that, you go uphill on fire roads, gravel roads, and descend on the trails. So having this nice powerful motor, quite steep C-tube angle, and the bike will climb pretty much anything they expect the customer of this bike to be riding. But I decided to properly challenge the bike, do some seriously steep climbs. I went back to the steep rocky trail I rode on the SL bike, but I rode it the other way. Started by going uphill. Some of these drops are quite steep, so I didn't really expect to get up. And I was surprised to find I actually did get up. Of course, I wasn't sitting on the saddle, I was leaning forward, but you will have to do that on any bike riding this kind of climbs. And it even got up sections that I failed on the eOne-Sixty SL, but that's most likely due to the extra motor power of the eOne-Eighty and that I might not have been in the correct gear on the eOne-Sixty. So sure, it will climb despite its frame geometry, but with pedals, I assume 27.5 kilos bike, that can't be much fun on the flatter trails, can it? But it was. And the reason, it's the design choices, the short rear end, the relatively steep, I'm not going to say it's a steep head tube angle, but it's not super slack, like 63 degrees. So it's quite easy lifting the front end. The steeper head tube angle makes the steering a bit sharper. If you go fast into a drop, you do a sharp turn, do a lot of braking before rolling the drop. You won't feel the steering starting to fold. So it's easy holding the steering back when braking and going slow. So this heavy bike, it feels lighter than you would expect, even when going slow. But it is, of course, the descents it's made for. I went down again the same rocky trail with these jumps and drops. And yeah, some of these steep drops, it seemed they have shrunk in size. This Merida eOne-Eighty, it inspired me with more confidence compared to riding the eOne-Sixty SL with a slightly low front end. But this was my final ride of the day. I was a bit worn out. I wasn't pushing that hard, or so I thought, because I went into this section of consecutive bumps, which I've been rolling and pumping on the eOne-Sixty, and on the eOne-Eighty, riding calmly, I was jumping them, and of course landing on the top of the next bump, so it wasn't comfortable at all, but I had to go a lot faster to be able to double them. But the point is, I was just riding relaxed, casually, and I was going much faster. It's a way more capable and confident bike, of course. And it made me realize what this bike is all about. The short rear end, steeper head tube angle, heavy bike. These are some nice compromises, because if this was a heavy, long, slack bike, it would have been so sluggish, so heavy to steer and handle in the corners. So steepening it, shortening it, keeping the wheelbase down, you would assume that trades off a bit of stability, downhill performance. But the weight of the bike, it makes it inherently so stable and so confident. So I'm pretty sure it wouldn't feel like much of a sacrifice. It's a surprising choice by Merida, and it makes a lot of sense after having ridden the bike. Just looking at the specs, I had a hard time figuring out what this bike was all about, but not anymore. This untraditional design makes for a fun, yet capable and stable bike, and I really like it. That's it. Appreciate any likes and subscribes. Thanks for watching.